Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. It's a little bit of a different one because I'm actually going to be talking about my tournament run with the Roaring Moon Dudunsparce deck. I ended up getting 14th place in a 200 person online tournament. I kind of want to talk about this deck because I think it's really interesting. It did obviously do pretty well this past weekend at the Monterrey Regionals, kind of coming out of nowhere, I would say. Yeah, as you can see, Raul right here ended up getting 10th place at that regional with Roaring Moon Dudunsparce, which is a deck that I feel like hasn't really been a thing. I think like last year, you know, it was kind of a deck that was popping up a little bit. I'd say a little bit more so like, you know, kind of on the Roaring Moon EX side rather than the Baby Moon. But we haven't really seen this deck anywhere. It's not a deck that's talked about. It was a very unusual deck to kind of see up there at the regional. But that being said, you know, I was kind of looking at this deck and I was thinking about it. And I was like, you know what? I feel like this is kind of a good meta pick, and I can kind of understand why now. So yesterday, I decided to enter the Tournament of Doom tournament, which is a tournament that's held on Friday nights, kind of late at night, so it actually works with my schedule. The first online tournament that I think I've really kind of entered, to be honest. I've been wanting to do online tournaments. I just feel like I'm always busy. But I was like, you know, I got some food. Let me, you know, enter this tournament, kind of see how I do. Because today I plan on going to a local, and I was trying to decide, like, you know, do I play this deck? Is it actually decent, or do I just run it back with Dragapult? Because last week I played Dragapult at a local. I ended up winning the whole thing. Had a pretty good run overall. The deck just feels really good. But I was like, you know what? Do I just run it back, or do I test this deck out? So this tournament had 215 people. I entered it with the Roaring Moon Dudunsparce deck, and I ended up bubbling out of top 8. I ended up getting 14th place at 6-2. And overall, my run was pretty solid. I'll go ahead and kind of talk about like the deck, how that works, and kind of what I think about it. And then I'll kind of talk about my matchups here. And I'll also kind of talk about some of the big like meta relevant matchups and kind of how to pilot those. So yeah, we'll just kind of talk a little bit about this deck, and I'll kind of give you guys my thoughts. Now, for full transparency here, I went ahead and just ran the 60 back that Raul did at the regional. I didn't change any cards. Looking at the list now, having played through the tournament, I really kind of feel like you're missing an Iono here. Every game kind of feels like at the end of the game, your opponent has a hand of like 15 cards. And it kind of feels like if you could Iono them, you could really kind of disrupt their game. So I do kind of want to include an Iono. I'm not sure what I would cut. A lot of these cards just feel really good for consistency. I think if I were to cut a card, it would maybe either be a Fan Rotom or maybe Counter Catcher. I'll kind of explain why. But I do think adding an Iono would be really good here, just because there are some games where you might get a slow start, not very often. And you know, let's say you draw into Iono, you could kind of get out of a bad situation. But mostly for the late game, I think that it can really help close out games, especially because you're playing Neutralization Zone. So you can Iono, put that down, and really disrupt your opponent. But looking through the deck, obviously the star of the show here, your support engine right here is going to be Dunsparce. This right here is the optimal Dunsparce with the Find a Friend attack. So if you're ever in a situation where you can't do anything, you know, let's say you're going second, you can't really get an attack off, or you just kind of have a bad start, you can always go for Find a Friend here. Whenever I do use that, I like to use that to find the Dunsparce. Obviously it's just, you know, situational, but a lot of times if you have a bad hand and you're kind of forced to use Find a Friend, a lot of times you kind of want to grab the Dunsparce because then you can kind of draw some more cards next turn and really get set up. Obviously, we're going to run 4 Dudunsparces, 4 Dunsparces. That is like our draw engine because the Dunsparce does have the runaway draw ability. And that, of course, allows us to draw 3 cards and then shuffle this Pokemon back into our deck. So basically, this thing is constantly going in and out of the game. You're setting your whole board up with Dunsparces. You're basically evolving them and you're drawing cards. I like to have my optimal board. If I don't get Fan Rotom out, I honestly like to just have 4 Dunsparces on my bench and then like 2 Baby Moons. In most games, it feels pretty good. That way you can kind of, you know, have a couple Dunsparces sitting on your bench in case you get Iono'd. Then it's kind of just like a Pheasantipity just sitting there. It's already evolved, nothing you have to do. And then that way also you do have a couple baby ones that you can, you know, constantly evolve as well. So just kind of always having Dunsparces out is what you want to do, just so you can kind of, you know, constantly draw cards. Unlike a lot of other Dunsparce based decks, I feel like you actually do have the bench space. You know, there's decks like Goldango and other decks that try to run the Dunsparce. I always watch Azul's stuff and he always, you know, he hates on this Pokemon here, and I can understand why, because I feel like in a lot of those decks You're running, you know, other Pokemon as well, so you don't really have that bench space to really, you know, constantly use this Pokemon. With this deck, it's like pretty straightforward. You know, you always want to have like 2 Baby Moons out, depending on the matchup, I guess. And you just kind of want to constantly have Dunsparces out, so you can just fill your whole bench up with them. Like, it's not hurting you in any way. Like, that's the only other Pokemon that you run pretty much, so you just always want to have Dunsparces in play. And what's nice about it too is that it's a good pivot tool. So let's say that, well, I'll kind of explain this a little bit more later, but let's say you have a Roaring Moon in the active spot and your opponent knocks it out. You can push up to Dunsparce, kind of do what you need to throughout your turn, and then you can use the ability to basically get a free retreat into whatever you want. This is gonna be very good in case, you know, depending on the matchup, in case you have to use Roaring Moon EX with some energy switches and things like that. But let's say, you know, maybe you're missing a card or you're not sure if you have the pieces. You can, you know, basically save that to Dunsparce as your last action before you switch in, because you get to draw the cards before you have to switch into your benched Pokemon. So it allows you to see those 3 cards, and let's say you don't have what you need to attack with the EX, then you can push up the Baby Moon instead. It's a good pivot tool, I would say. Our main attacker is going to be the Baby Roaring Moon with Vengeance Fletching. Obviously, Ancient Box fans out there are probably pretty happy about this one here. 70 damage. It does 10 more for each Ancient card in your discard pile. So unlike Ancient Box, you're not hitting for these, you know, bigger numbers. This thing is not going to hit, you know, as hard. But I'd say the format is a lot different now. A lot of decks have these small basics, you know, Ralts, Dreepy, you know, Gimme Ghoul, things like that. So you're kind of constantly able to bring things up or just attack things that are like weaker. Even if you 2-shot things, you know, there are some Pokemon that really can't 1-shot Roaring Moon like this. If I put a booster capsule on this guy and I'm playing against Gardevoir and they don't have any Monkey Dory set up, you know, Gardevoir can't knock this out unless they, you know, use something else like I was gonna say a balloon, a Drifloon, or, you know, something like that, obviously. But let's say they have to attack with Gardevoir, they have no other options, they're not knocking this thing out. So it is kind of a tanky Pokemon with the booster capsule. It's really good against Iron Hands, I would say too, which I'll kind of talk about that matchup. But overall, you know, pretty solid attacker. We do run some Ancient cards, obviously, so it does hit pretty okay into a lot of things. So a lot of times, you're going to want to kind of attack with Roaring Moon, and you're going to want to save the EX to kind of close games out, or depending on the matchup, to kind of just, you know, trade into things. Our last big attacker here is Roaring Moon EX. Obviously hits very hard with Frenzied Gouging, also has Calamity Storm to discard a Stadium and do 120 more damage. That's going to knock out most things, like, you know, Ogerpon. I'm kind of blinking out here. That's the first thing I can think of is Ogerpon. But it does hit a lot of things pretty hard with Calamity Storm, but Frenzied Gouging is really, really good in certain matchups when you're going against these big Pokemon, you need these big knockouts, and you have no way around them. You know, you can go ahead and hit with Roaring Moon EX. Let's say they invest all their resources into one big Pokemon, Roaring Moon comes in, knocks it out, and, you know, you're just kind of taking a pretty big lead there. It's also pretty good with the Neutralization Zone because Frenzied Gouging does still work, I believe, since, you know, it's an effect of the attack, it's not actual damage, so kind of a good option there as well if you have the Stadium up. The last Pokemon here is Fan Rotom. This is strictly just to get your Dunsparces out. It can be very good turn 1 because we do run things like Buddy Poffin, but we don't really want to burn them turn 1 because we kind of need them throughout the game. We're constantly shuffling Dunsparces back into the deck, so we need those Buddy Poffins to get them back out. So if you can get a Fan Rotom off turn 1 and get set up like that, it can be very, very good. It's also a decent attacker into things like Badoo. Let's say you get a slow start, you can't get Sadas going, nothing like that. You can attack with Fan Rotom if you have like an Artazon in play or something like that. So overall, pretty decent Pokemon to have. It can be kind of a liability, I guess, against like Dragapult and things like that with the Halucha, but I mean, it's really not that big a deal. It's just one prize card. That's it for all the Pokemon there. All the Pokemon make a lot of sense. I don't think I would change anything about the Pokemon list. It all just kind of flows. Same thing with the energies. We run 6 dark. Feels pretty good. I never really felt like I was in a position where I needed more energies. I never felt like I had too many energies. 6 just feels like a really good count overall. Looking at the rest of the list here, we obviously have the Ancient Supporters. There's only 2 of them. We run 4 Sadas. That's going to be our main one, obviously, to get energies in play and things like that, and to be able to draw cards. And then Explorer's Guidance is a card that will get you out of situations. And it doesn't feel too bad in this deck because a lot of times the things you're discarding are like Great Balls, Buddy Poffins, things like that that you can kind of live without. So, you know, Explorer's Guidance doesn't feel too bad in this deck, but it's kind of just mostly to throw in your discard pile as well. We've got 2 bosses orders here. I kind of want to include a third one. I think bosses feels really good once you're set up. Just being able to boss anything up, take early knockouts, kind of just stay ahead constantly. This is one of those decks where you can kind of just attack turn 1, which right now in the format, it feels like a lot of decks can't do that. So a lot of times if you take that early lead, you can kind of just, you know, keep flowing there. Your biggest threat is getting like Iono throughout the game, but that's why you set those Dunsparces up and you let them just kind of sit there. That way you kind of have a way to get out of situations. So another boss's orders would feel really good, but again, I'm not sure what I would cut. Maybe to cut the counter catcher and throw in the bosses. My thought process there is you're probably not gonna fall behind. I feel like you're constantly ahead in the game, and they're not really knocking out 2 prizers, so they're not gonna really catch up in that sense. So maybe we throw in another bosses and get rid of the counter catcher, but I don't know. And then I feel like in the matchups where like they do take an early lead, like let's say they're playing Raging Bolt and they knock you out first, I feel like counter catchers are not that helpful because you don't have any way to search it out. And then also, like, what are you gonna boss up another Raging Bolt? Like, they have a bunch of big basic, you know, EXs, so either way, like, you know what I mean? So I think maybe you cut the counter catcher for a third boss. Got 4 Buddy Poffins to get Dunsparces out, 4 Ultra Balls to get energies in the discard pile and to get other things from your deck. Got the 4 Earthen Vessels, same thing. 4 Great Ball. Great Ball is a card that you don't see too often, but it makes a lot of sense in this deck. It's kind of like a Pokegear, but for Pokemon, you look at the top 7 cards of your deck and take any Pokemon from there and put it in your hand. Very good card since we do run the Dunsparce. Since we do run Roaring Moon EX, and that way we don't have to just rely on Ultra Ball. So it's a really good search option. We're kind of thinning out our deck with the Dunsparce anyways, so this is a great way to kind of get what you need. We've got the 2 energy switches. This is pretty much just for Roaring Moon EX. I'll kind of explain how that works. The 1 Super Rod, which can be pretty helpful to get the Dunsparce back especially, or some energies if you kind of run out of Sadas. The 1 counter catcher, 4 ancient booster capsules. Again, good thing to kind of add to your discard pile, but it's also very good on your Pokemon. Roaring Moon EX, let's say you use Frenzied Gouging, you're left with 30 health. With the booster capsule, now you're left with 90 health, so just a little bit more room there in case you're up against like a Monkey Dory or something like that. And then Roaring Moon obviously makes it a lot more tanky at 200 HP. And then we got 3 Artazon to kind of just have a stadium in play, get basics out, be able to bump other stadiums, which is very important. And the 1 Neutralization Zone. And if you don't know what this card does, basically it prevents all damage done to Pokemon that don't have a rule box from Pokemon that do have a rule box. So in other words, EX Pokemon cannot hit your Pokemon that are not EX Pokemon. Let me tell you, this is probably the primary reason why I chose this deck, because I looked at a lot of the top decks in the format right now, and I said, you know what? I think with this card, you can single-handedly win a lot of games. Even if they know you have it, you can still kind of just win. And that was honestly the case, especially against Joltik box, which has popping up everywhere, which doesn't run any stadium cards, and most of them don't run any recovery options. So basically, you can just knock out Joltik and they have 0 ways to attack you. You just actually win the game. So I'm honestly really sad that I bubbled out of top 8, because looking at top 8, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 Joltik players. And that honestly feels like a very, very free matchup, because again, most of them have no stadiums. A lot of them run no recovery cards. And looking at their Pokemon, we've got Miraidon EX, Iron Hands EX, Pikachu EX, Joltik, Latias EX, Mew EX, Iron Leaves EX, Fezandipity EX, Blood Moon. There's no way for them to attack you. So you actually just win. You put the stadium in play and there's no way for them to win the game. And looking at the results last week, looking at what I've seen online, I just had a feeling Joltik is going to be very popular. It's just, you know, the new deck that popped out of nowhere that everyone wants to play. I keep running into it on ladder. And I was like, you know what, like having Neutralization Zone, I feel like is very good in this matchup. So I was like, you know, let's just go ahead and try it out and see what happens. And yeah, it's a very good matchup, obviously. This right here was my tournament run. There was 8 rounds total into top 8, and I did not make top 8. I ended up getting, I was 6-2, so I bubbled out. Like whoever made top 8 at those, you know, bottom slots were also 6-2. So Unfortunately, wasn't able to make it in, and I kind of had a feeling too after I got my second loss, but I'll kind of talk about how those happened as well. But this right here was my run. Round 1, I ended up playing against a Lowland Executor, which is very interesting. I've actually seen this deck. Somebody was playing it at a local last week, or like a variant of this basically, which it's kind of a scary Pokemon in a sense because Neutralization Zone does nothing, because they can attack with Swinging Sphene. And because it's an effect of the attack, it will actually work. And whether it's heads or tails, they're knocking out a basic Pokemon, so either way they're knocking me out. So this was kind of a scary Pokemon to deal with, but in this matchup it was one of those situations where I took early knockouts with Baby Roaring Moon, and then once this guy was set up, they had all the energies invested. That's when I pulled off the Energy Switch combo and knocked it out with Roaring Moon EX. And again, the way that the Energy Switch combo works, it's pretty simple. So basically how this works is you can pull it off in one turn. You can power up Roaring Moon EX. Obviously Dark Patch was good back in the day, but we don't have it anymore. So what you want to do is go for Professor Sada's and attach one of those darks to a Roaring Moon and then one to Roaring Moon EX. Then you have to attach an energy for turn onto Roaring Moon EX, and then you energy switch that Sada energy from your baby Roaring Moon onto the EX Pokemon, and then that's how you get 3 energies on there. And again, obviously, if you have Dunsparce in your active spot, you can go to Dunsparce, put it back into your deck, and then push the Roaring Moon EX back up. So that's typically what I do. Like, let's say I want to power up my EX, and I don't know if I can pull it off yet. They just knocked out my baby Roaring Moon. Then let me push up a Dunsparce. That way I can kind of see some more cards, and if I know I can pull it off, then that's when I go for it. You never really want to bench Roaring Moon EX early, especially with Dragapult, with Monkey Dory, all that kind of stuff. Because if they put 30 damage on you, then you can't really go for Frenzied Gouging how you want to without knocking yourself out. So a lot of times you want to just kind of keep it in your hand until you're ready to go for the combo there. But yeah, overall this was like a pretty cool deck. It was not really that close, I would say. I got a pretty early lead and they just weren't able to get energies out, so overall felt pretty good. Our round 2 matchup was against a Tank Terapagos deck. Honestly, this is a matchup where when I saw this, I was like, I don't know how I win this. Just because I don't know how I'm doing enough damage, to be honest. You know, Tank Terapagos is already tanky enough, but there's really not a lot of good ways around it. Overall, felt pretty good. This was a close one. I forgot how exactly it went down. I know there were a couple situations where they had some Noctowls out. I was able to boss them up and knock them out before they could evolve. I think early game, they kind of burned a lot of their Noctowls. They grabbed, you know, different cards, but after their turn, they were left with like 2 cards in hand, so they couldn't really do anything. And at that point, I kind of just knocked out their ways and their abilities to get more cards. So that was kind of the goal here, was to keep shutting down Noctowl before it could come out, and then just kind of slowly knock other things out. They did get the Genesect into play to shut down my Neutralization Zone before I could put it down. So that was very interesting. I was trying to bump all their stadiums, but you know, obviously if they know what they're doing, they're gonna know you have Neutralization Zone. They're gonna wait to put their stadiums down, which is where I think that Iono kind of comes in clutch. But yeah, overall this was a pretty close one. I believe I got some knockouts with the Roaring Moon EX as well. But the big thing here was just kind of being able to boss around and knock out those Hoots. My round 3 was actually a DQ because they didn't show up. They were playing Archaludon, but same thing. I was kind of like, I don't know how I win that matchup. Archaludon very tanky. That's probably a matchup where you need to rely on Roaring Moon EX as well. So definitely one of those types of games. So yeah, I'm kind of glad that the DQ'd, not gonna lie. That feels like it probably is a bad matchup. Round 4 was against the Joltik box, and again, this is a pretty free matchup. I kind of knew that going into this as well. Looking at their deck list here, the only Pokemon they can actually do damage with to me is Galvantula once I get my stadium down. They don't play any other stadium cards, and that's pretty much how it went, you know. I kind of just had it in hand, and I knocked out Joltik because what are they going to do turn 1? They're going to, you know, accelerate energy with Joltik, so it's going to be in the active spot. So I went ahead and knocked out a Joltik already. It's gone. They have, you know, no way to bring it back. They don't really run any, recovery cards, so they only have one more Joltik in the deck. And yeah, just started kind of doing damage. I put some booster capsules on my Pokemon. I mean, really, you could just put Stadium down and win. Like, I could have just done that, to be honest, but I started knocking some stuff out, and then I kind of put it down, you know, mid-game. But yeah, pretty much in this matchup, if they play no stadiums, you can just put down Neutralization Zone and you win the game. Now, even if they were to include stadiums, this still feels like it could be a pretty good matchup. You would obviously knock on Joltik, take your 1 prize, probably boss up the Latios at some point that they're gonna have benched, and you're, you know, got 3 prizes. And then at some point you're gonna kind of probably use a Roaring Moon EX to close out the game. So yeah, overall it still feels like a pretty good match. But yeah, the fact that they play no stadiums, it's just a free win. My next round was a loss against Goldango. This one felt pretty bad, not gonna lie. I feel like this matchup isn't terrible. I had a hard time getting set up in this game. Like I really wasn't able to take advantage of knocking out Gimme Ghouls. I remember they had the Iron Bundle sitting in the active. I couldn't get enough Ancients in my discard pile to knock it out in 1 turn. So I kind of just wasted a turn there. And by then they already had Goldangos on their bench. And yeah, with this one too, they do play the 1 Jamming Tower as well. So it's kind of a situation where they, you know, waited to put it down. So it was kind of bad. Like it felt kind of bad, not gonna lie. And this is again one of those where they had a huge hand. I had no way to get their hand smaller, so they just had access to everything by the end of the game. So that's why I really think an Iono is going to be good in this deck. I'm probably going to add that in for today at the local, just because, especially in a matchup like this, once they get set up, once they draw their cards, like they're not going anywhere. They can basically take knockouts every single turn. And if they don't play their Jamming Tower, then you can't really put your Neutralization Zone down, because as soon as you do, they're just going to bump it right away. So in a matchup like this, I feel like you have to kind of take the early knockouts, and if you get a slow start, then you kind of just lose, and that's kind of what happened. Round 6 was against the Flareon deck here with the Sylveon as well. This one was again a pretty close one overall. I'm trying to remember exactly how it went down. I know I got a knockout with Roaring Moon EX at some point, and I want to say that I got Neutralization Zone down to where they couldn't really do much. I don't remember if I actually put it down though or not. This was an interesting one. I feel like they were really going heavy on the Sylveon, but it really didn't do much for them, because I mean, I had my whole board filled up with Dunsparces, with Roaring Moons. They had no way to really like boss around my active Roaring Moons, so they would like shuffle in a bench Roaring Moon and a Dunsparce, but it really didn't matter, just because I have so many tools to get them back out. So even if I had something set up, I could just bring it right back out, go for Sada. It really wasn't a big deal. So overall, this one felt pretty good. This is the matchup I'm going to be testing some more today. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, overall felt pretty good. It just kind of felt like, you know, Sylveon can't really knock me out. It does 160 damage. Angelite doesn't feel bad against me. Like I can just get more stuff out. So Sylveon felt kind of useless. And then with Flareon, same thing. Burning Charge doesn't knock me out. And then if they go for the other attack, you know, they can't attack next turn with it. So overall, it felt pretty good. Yeah, it was a close one, but I never really felt like I was just gonna outright lose. Round 7 here, this one was a nightmare up against Hydreigon, which has been popping up online. I've been seeing it a little bit. Looking at this deck, it's kind of crazy. There's a lot of Pokemon here, obviously, and this one felt really bad for 2 reasons. Number one, I knew they had an Artazon. I knew that they knew what I was playing, and I knew they were not going to put it down at any point, and they didn't. So I already kind of knew, like, okay, Neutralization Zone is not going to be too helpful here. I think it's definitely better when, like, you don't know what your opponent's playing. But yeah, it felt pretty bad here. And then the other reasons why this felt really bad, because I knew, like, if Hydreigon got set up, like, I just kind of lose, right? It does 130 damage to, like, all my Pokemon, basically. So I basically can't have Dunsparces out unless they're fully evolved. Roaring Moons, you know, it's just gonna take 2 turns to knock them out. It just felt very, very bad. And I just could not get the start going. Like, this was a very, very slow start. I could get nothing going in this game. And to be fair, they had a very slow start too, but I feel like it kind of benefits them more. They're already playing a slower deck, and for me, like, with this deck, you kind of just need to take knockouts early, or at least be putting pressure on with damage. And I couldn't get anything going. Like, it took me a few turns before I could get anything actually set up. So it felt very bad. I couldn't get Fan Rotom out. I couldn't get Dudunsparces. I couldn't get my Sadas or you know, things in my discards. So it just felt very bad. So I think in general, this is probably like a pretty bad matchup overall. But I also had a slow start, so the combination of those two things, and they also played insane too. I forgot to point that out. So they played very good too. But once they had Pidgeot set up, it was kind of like GG's from there, it felt like. And lastly, we do have the meta deck right here, the Dragapult with the Dusknoir here. This is a matchup I really wanted to test out. This is kind of like the deck that I wanted to play against to kind of see like, okay, should I play this or not? Because for whatever reason, I have not been running to Dragapult online at all. This is an interesting one here. So obviously with Dragapult, they do have ways to kind of attack you. But I feel like if you can set your board up right, I think this is a pretty favorable matchup. A lot of Dragapults don't play stadiums. If they do, they play like Artazon. But a lot of them don't play stadiums. So if you can get Neutralization Zone set up, then they have a few options to attack you. They have Dracloak, which does 70 damage. They have Dusknoirs, which can put damage on you. And then they also have Badoo to kind of item lock you, and you know, it does hit for weakness, I guess. But those are kind of the three options there. And then obviously with Dragapult EX, they can't attack your active, but they can spread damage to your bench. So it's kind of tricky because you need to set your board up in a way to where they can't really keep benefiting from it, you know what I mean? They could technically like knock out your active Roaring Moon if it has a booster capsule by going, you know, Dusknoir and then hitting with Dracloak. So you never want to be in a situation where you only have one Pokemon active, unless you only have one prize card left to where they can't pull that off. So you always need to have like one thing on your bench pretty much. I do think that the Dunsparces are very good. I think that once they play their Hawlucha down, you're pretty much safe to keep benching them because you can just evolve, put them back into your deck, and get rid of damage. But you do kind of need to bait out that Hawlucha. That way they don't put that extra damage there. But yeah, overall feels pretty good. You just have to be very careful in this matchup, just because they can go for some plays where, like, you know, if you only have two Pokemon in play and they have like two Duskulls on their board, you know, they technically could pull something off to where they knock both of them out. So I'd say early on, you want to kind of fill your bench up a little bit as you're kind of taking prizes, and then as the game goes on, you never want to overbench Pokemon, and you never want to underbench either. You need to kind of look at their board, kind of understand, okay, like what could they pull off here? Could they go Dusknoir, spread some damage, and then put out like a Dusclops? You know, is there any kind of way that they can kind of win the game right here? So that's what you have to kind of look out for. But overall, the matchup feels really good, especially if they don't play any stadium cards. It feels very good. And yeah, I'll kind of see today. I'm sure a lot of people are going to play Dragapult today, so I'll kind of see how that actually goes. I'm kind of excited for it, but yeah, we'll see what happens. But yeah, that was kind of my tournament run. As you guys can see, Joltik ended up, you know, running this event. I do think if I would have made top 8, I think I could have made a run if I ran into the right matchups, just because that matchup is so favorable. There's also a Dragapult as well. And then the other 3 here, these are probably like bad matchups, so I probably would have lost those. But if I would have ran into Joltik, I might have had a chance, I'm just saying. But I did end up bubbling out at 6-2. The one deck that I don't see at all here, like at all, is Gardevoir. I don't know if anybody played it. 46 was the highest one. This is like the other big meta deck, I would say, that I didn't really talk about. This is a matchup that it feels like it would be unfavorable because they're hitting you with Drifloon, they're hitting you with Screen Tail and things like that. They can, you know, constantly kind of just go for what they want. But overall, it feels pretty good. I'm sure against the better Gardevoir players, it feels pretty bad because they're never going to just leave their Gardevoir EX out, especially if they play Turo. They know it's a liability. They're going to get it off the board, so you can't really take that extra prize lead. But against most Gardevoir players that will just keep a Gardevoir in play, it feels very good because you can just boss it up, you hit it for weakness, you take the prize card lead, and they can't really catch up. So overall, it feels pretty good, I would say. I haven't had any problems with it, but I can also see how it's unfavorable if they really know what they're doing. But yeah, that's my kind of little overview here of the deck. I was streaming this deck the other day, had a lot of fun doing that too, so I do think these tournaments, I'm going to start trying to stream them on Fridays, kind of late night Fridays on the YouTube channel and on Twitch. So make sure you guys check that out if I am live on those days. But overall, I felt really good. This deck feels really good in general. I'm still a little bit skeptical, but I'm gonna kind of try to force myself to play it today on my local. If I do play it and I do good, I'll go ahead and let you guys know in the comments. I'll leave a note there. But yeah, overall felt pretty good. Feels very consistent. The only games that felt pretty bad were the games that I lost, and even then, it's not like I really bricked or anything. It was just like I had kind of a slow start, and I feel like in those matchups, you really need a fast start. So yeah, I never really felt like I was just kind of stuck. But I'll go ahead and have this list in the description below if you guys want to copy it and use it yourselves. Again, I will be cutting a card to add an Iono. I'm not sure what. And I might be cutting a counter catcher to add another boss's orders, but we'll have to go ahead and wait and see. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure you subscribe if you liked it, and I'll catch you all in the next one.